Hey there, this is Coach Bill with Meditate School of Mindfulness coming to you with a class, a workshop, or a course, whatever you want to call it. In It's really the focus of the mind-body connection, and it is a lesson in mindful eating. And the reason we use mindful eating to connect them to become aware of the mind body connection is how apparent it is in our life. That when we focus and practice and recognize the cravings and the way we do things and the habits, it allows us to see and by bringing the mind and the body together, we have the ability to change how we're moving forward or how we're acting or how we're connecting to the cravings and the desires that come our way. So much of what we study is this the fact that we are usually disconnected. Mind body is disconnected. We're physically in one place, but our mind is somewhere else. And we spend so much time going through our life on autopilot. And one of the ways that is most apparent is the way we eat, the autopilot mode of just going through the same old routine when we eat, falling into those same old habits. For me, this is such a profound and amazing practice because I used to be that person. I was much heavier not too long ago, well, many years ago, and I worked in the restaurant industry, so I was surrounded by food, and I spent a whole lot of time going through all these different diets. I tried every single one of them, and we know that deprivation diets don't work, but I tried them all because they sounded good at the time. So, what would happen is I'd lose 10 pounds and then I'd go back to eating regularly and I'd gain 12. And then I'd lose another 5 pounds and I'd gain seven. And I'd lose some more and I'd gain. And it's that yo yo going up and down. But the truth is, that is the way our body responds to the starvation part of it. So if we starve ourselves, what's the body going to do? The next time it has that time of abundance, it's going to store the excess as fat so that when you starve it again, it has some reserves. The truth is, we can't really go into this space without changing our habits. We can't transform our life with the same old from that same old mindset. So we need to have some of these tools that can show us this. And mindful eating has been something that is such has such a awakening when we connect to how we approach food. In our society, we tend to build our celebrations around food, and it's a beautiful thing. Family gatherings, holidays, birthdays, we come together, and what do? We eat. Well, unfortunately, we get stuck in that mindset that we overeat. And then a lot of the habits that we carry into our adulthood are the ways we learn to eat as children. And the way we eat as children should be so much different than the way we eat as adults. But we had those messages that if we finish everything on our plate, we'll get a reward like dessert or we'll get to go out and play. So after dozens of years of that behavior, it becomes ingrained. So deep down in our mind, we think if we finish our plate, we're going to feel good or we're going to get some kind of a reward. And then the other thing about that is that reward of having a piece of chocolate or a dessert or something is something that made us feel good, this sense of accomplishment. So when we feel bad, our natural response is to look for something that's going to make us feel good. So if I'm in a state of grief or a state of depression or sadness or whatever it is, I'm going to turn to food to make me feel better. It doesn't usually work. It might work for a short amount of time, but it doesn't usually work. It's not lasting, and it doesn't get us into that place of transformation. So one of the most important parts of our practice is paying attention to our habitual response to how we go through our life. And when we bring this awareness into our practice, it can change everything. So we'll start right here. Sorry.
Mindfulness is an intervention or a meditation practice that can actually be used when people encounter an uncomfortable craving or an urge to act out their addictive behaviors. The way it works is essentially often when someone encounters a craving or an urge, there's a belief about that craving or an urge. And the meaning that gets attached to it is this is bad. But really, the craving or the urge to act out is neither good nor bad. And when we use mindfulness, that's exactly what we do. We suspend judgment about the craving. I mean, I understand why patients have that belief because historically, the craving or the urge leads to the behavior. And the behavior has all of these negative consequences that have been bad for them. And so often they immediately assume that the craving itself is bad. But the craving is just a physiological experience that they encounter, that they often feel through their increased heart rate or respirations, or just even psychologically their beliefs about, I've got to do something with this craving. In mindfulness, what we do is we learn how to be present with that craving, to coexist with that craving. Rather than having this, I have to slay the dragon mentality, we try to help patients through mindfulness learn to coexist with the craving or the urge and not give it special status or attach this meaning to it that's judgmental, meaning it's bad. That would be a judgment. In mindfulness, we suspend that judgment. And so through mindfulness exercises, a person, for example, might feel this craving, they might feel this urge to act out their addictive behaviors, but they would learn to be present with that and pay attention to what happens physiologically in the body. And what patients will often report is this pattern or this this timeline where the craving urges and it rises and they feel this intensity and then it kind of subsides. It might rise, it subsides, and then it kind of just gently goes away. Not because that's the goal of mindfulness, but because by being okay with the craving and the urge and being willing to be present with that craving and the urge, the natural the natural timeline is that it doesn't last forever. It comes, it goes, it waxes, it wanes, but that they realize, wow, I can tolerate this craving and the urge, and I don't have to act out on it. And that all of a sudden creates a totally different relationship with cravings and urges that historically have led to acting out. Now I can actually reorganize my relationship with this craving and urge, and I can coexist with it, and it doesn't have to lead to my addictive behaviors.
So the objectives in this workshop are to recognize, bring the awareness to what it is that we're, how we're going about our habits and our routines and eating, and then to show you how this practice of mindful eating can have such an amazing effect with our clients, with ourselves, in our lives by turning our mind to being aware and accepting that the way I've always done thing isn't always the right thing. And then recognizing we're not ever stuck. We have the ability to change. So, we're going to define a bit of mindful eating. We're going to learn some of the steps of practicing mindful eatings. We're going to identify the difference between hunger and satiety. And we're going to learn easy tips to incorporate mindful eating into our daily schedule and how we can use some of these meditative practices to help our clients move forward or help ourselves move forward in change. It's not Mindful eating is never really about deprivation. And that's a huge difference because if we deprive ourselves of something that we enjoy, then we get deep down inside, we have this angst about it. There's an emotional response to that deprivation. So the truth is, we can pretty much, with some limitations, eat anything that we choose as long as we're doing it with intention and in moderation. Because the deprivation part of it leads us to that space where we binge. I can tell you how amazing this practice is. One of the first times I ever taught this course was back when I first got into the practice, and I held this workshop with maybe there were 15 people there. And one of the people there, the gentleman was in the restaurant business. He was a restaurant supplier, and he was obviously well, not obvious, but he was overweight. And when we were talking about mindful eating, he put up a lot of barriers came up. Well, how am I supposed to do this when I'm working in the field? How am I supposed to do this? How am I supposed and what I kept hearing in the message is he's convinced himself he can't do it, right? So I'm going to use some tools to show him that he can. And there were snippets in there that really sank into him about how he's repeating the same behavior over and over a day, over again. And so he took what he could out of that workshop, even though he left it doubting a lot of it. But he came back about a month later and said he's really started to embrace some of the practices, not all of them, but some of them. And one of the routines that he had fallen into was every afternoon while he's out delivering, he would stop at a convenience store and pick up a bag of chips, another thing, and a soda. Whether he was hungry or not, didn't matter what he had for lunch or what he was having for dinner or what was going on. It was just part of his routine. And when he noticed that and he brought it into like, why am I pulling into this store? And why am I picking up these three things that I tend to pick up every single day? Why? What's the intention? And a lot of it was just habit. It's just my habit. And when he started to break that habit and ask himself if he really needed this, or what if I chose this thing instead of this thing? And it really changed. And then he started to incorporate more and more. And after about 3 months, 4 months, I don't remember exactly how long, he came back to me and he had lost a lot of weight. And then he sent his kids in, and his kids were, um, resistant. And I loved sitting in his son was probably about 10 or 12. And every time we did one of the exercises, and the one that stood out to me the most was the chocolate exercise. And he said, I said, so ask yourself, why do you need more? Why can't you stop there? And his answer was, well, what if I don't ever get to have chocolate again? What if I get cut off or I get grounded? So there's that fear inside of ourselves when we would deprive ourselves of something that we might not get it quite regularly. So deprivation doesn't ever work. It's changing, it's transformation, it's changing that relationship, right? So mindful eating does take us back to the way our ancestors ate. So if you think about how our ancestors ate, there was a relationship with the food that they were eating. So most people either grew their food or bartered for it. There was some kind of a connection. There was an exchange, right? So there was something tangible, and they would never, never waste food because it cost them in some way or another. Waste was difficult for them. And they had that emotional connection. So we've lost that in the past dozen years or so. We don't even exchange money anymore. We put this plastic card, this uh, thing into a machine, and it takes the money out of our account, right? So we've lost all connection with this exchange, the emotional connection we have, the true emotional connection we have with where this food came from. So we have to focus on that and take ourselves back and say, hmm, I should be able to build an emotional connection with food. I should be able to. So, one of the most important things I say is look for the intent and purpose of that food. So, if you're out shopping and you're grabbing things, what's the intention of you putting that in your basket? What is the purpose of this food? And when you get to the purpose of it, if we can't recognize the purpose has something to do that contributes to the health and wellness of ourselves, then what's the point? The truth is, everything we ingest either has a positive or negative effect on the body. There's not a whole lot of in between, right? So if it's not going to lead to a positive, then why do it? Now, we can answer that why is because we feel like we want that slice of cheesecake or we want that bite of ice cream or whatever it is. And if we could come to that place and saying, because I enjoy it, that's okay. We're not depriving ourselves, but we're going to be honest with ourselves. And we bring that into awareness. We're bringing into awareness the fact that this is not the healthiest thing and it's not going to have a positive effect on my physical body, but it might make me feel better in some way or another. That's okay. But I'm only going to do it in moderation because if I do too much of it, then it truly is going to have a profound effect on my health and wellness. Bringing it into awareness and saying, this is why I'm doing it is so important. And then you accept the fact that this is why I'm doing it. And then we choose what we're going to do with that information. It's like everything we teach in this practice is bring it into awareness, accept the reality of it, and determine what we're going to do with that information, if anything. So if I know it's something that's not healthy for me, I'm going to go out of my way to make sure I do it in moderation and make sure I always connect with the reason why. Why am I putting this bite of food in my mouth? Do I need to take another? And what is that going to do to me? Right? Why? I said it before and I'll say it again. Mindfulness reawakens that childlike curiosity that we tend to push away. Why? Why ask why? Because we need to know why. What's the purpose? What's the intent? So, if we can turn our minds back and truly focus on the purpose of our foods, then logically we will start turning towards healthier things. Instead of reaching for a processed box of food or bag of food, we'll go more towards the fresh fruits and vegetables, the things that do have a purpose. Hmm. It's said that when we go grocery shopping, we should stick to the outside aisles of the store. Why? Because that's where the freshest fruits and dairy and meats and whatever it is that you focus on. Not always, because sometimes in some of those stores, the one of the outside aisles is paper products or sodas or something like that. Now, there are some things in the center of the store that are healthy and can be useful, fruits, nuts and grains and things like that. But for the most part, the healthiest stuff is in the vegetable section, and then the fresh food section. So we focus on those things, but always asking ourselves why. Why am I going to do this? And we get back to the very basic of the practice. So, what is mindful eating? It's paying attention to what we're eating and eating with awareness. It's being aware of every sensation that we experience when we're eating. And there is a lot there. And it's acknowledging the chewing and the tasting and the swallowing moment by moment. It's being present, it's being mindful.
Every living being on the planet has to eat, has to find nourishment. But it's only in the human being that the need to find nourishment can mean a heck of a lot more than what's on the plate. When we're children, we all learn that when we're hungry, meaning our body has gotten depleted in nutrients, we start to feel bad. We feel low in energy, that kind of low mood, crummy feeling. Then we eat food, and within minutes, we can start to feel better. In a country where, for most of us, ample access to food isn't actually an issue, it makes perfect sense that we reach out to food again and again to make ourselves feel better when we're under stress. Now, in bringing greater awareness to our relationship with food and eating, we begin to see that what we're actually hungry for a lot of the time actually has nothing to do with food. And the important thing here is that nobody has to tell it to us. It's what we begin to connect to for ourselves within the trajectory of our eating meditation practice. As we develop some familiarity with the comings and goings of our own mind as we eat, which is what happens when we practice an eating meditation, we begin to see these things for ourselves. If you've been on a diet your whole life, or have had what you feel to be kind of an unhealthy relationship with food, I can pretty much guarantee that there are certain habits of the mind that come into play probably every time you sit down with a plate of food. And for the most part, we're mostly unaware of just how much these habits of mind inform our behavior. But now, with awareness, with mindfulness, people begin to become aware of these habits of mind, and they start to wonder, do I really need to admonish myself every single time I take a bite of food? Or do I really need to push play on that soundtrack yet again of my mother telling me that in order to be a good little girl or boy, I need to clean my plate? Or whatever happens to be your particular habits of mind. Within the scope of awareness, it's important to remember that these are just thoughts, nothing more, nothing less. A teacher of mine once told me that just because we think something, we tend to think it's true. But in reality, we have many thoughts that turn out not to be true. One time in one of my classes, I thought a student was having problems with something I was saying, and it actually turned out that they had a stomach ache. What they were thinking or what was going on in the mind had nothing actually to do with me. It happens to us like that all the time. In reality, our thoughts only have as much truth as we choose to give them. And this recognition of thoughts for what they are and our choice to give them a certain amount of truth or not is, in my opinion, one of the greatest moments of recognition a human being can have. And this in and of itself can be one of the truly liberating aspects of a practice of an eating meditation. We practice letting go of thoughts by moving your mind from thoughts into the pure awareness of the experience of eating in this moment. But listen to this, we can't and don't choose anything on automatic pilot. The automation does the deciding for us from habit. Like a wheel going around and around in a rut, the road tends to be bumpy and uncertain away from the rut and more smooth and predictable within it. That's why we develop the habit of going on automatic pilot in the first place. When things get tough or stressful or overwhelming, it can seem to be a huge help to just move back into the rut and go back on automatic pilot. And sometimes it's really been all we can muster. But that's only because we haven't known a better way. And that's exactly what we're learning now, how to thrive in our experiences instead of just survive. Did you know that less than 2% of people actually weigh less 2 years after completing one of the top 4 diet programs in the United States? Now, it's very difficult to weigh exactly the same, so the inference is that most people who actually complete one of those programs weigh more 2 years later. And what do most of those programs focus on? The food. But the choice to eat an entire bag of Doritos doesn't come from the Doritos. It comes from us, from our minds. Another interesting statistic is that people who tend to do other things while they're eating weigh 18% more than people who just eat when they eat. That's 27 pounds on a 150-pound person. That's pretty substantial. There are 4 most common things that people do while they're eating. Watch television, engage in conversation, read a book, and listen to music. Let's take one of those scenarios, eating and watching TV. Say we take our plate of food, which is really an arbitrary amount of food when you look at it. We tend to fill up a plate, so whatever size your plate is generally determines how much food you'll be eating. Also, we always fix our plate of food when we're at our hungriest. Or someone else serves us and they worked extra hard on those mashed potatoes, so we end up with an extra dollop of those on the plate. In any case, the amount of food on our plates tends to be arbitrary in relation to how much food our body actually needs. So say we then take this arbitrary amount of food over to the coffee table and turn on the TV. Now, where is our mind? It's on the TV. And as long as our mind is on something other than eating while we're eating, we will necessarily eat from habit. It's literally how the fork finds our mouths without us having to pay much attention. And if it's been your habit to eat more than your body actually needs, or to eat too fast, or to clean your plate no matter the size of it, then as long as you keep your mind on something other than the experience of eating while you're eating, you are going to continue to repeat your habits. This is truly why, for most of us, change is so hard. Now listen to this. You can only change in the present. You can't change in the past, it's already over and done with. You can't change in the future, hasn't even happened yet. You can only change in the present. And if you don't have the ability to move your mind into the present while you're eating, for example, which is the same thing as turning off the automatic pilot when you eat, you will continue to eat in the same way that you always have. Automatic pilot never enables change, ever. That's the whole nature of automation in the first place. It's programmed behavior so that it can just happen in the same way again and again and again. It's what's easiest in the microcosm, but it's also what creates that sense of deep separation between ourselves and our lives in the long run. Listen to this. Choice is only enabled through awareness. If we were to say walk into our homes after work unaware, our minds will be in whatever state our day enabled. But if we walk into our homes with awareness, we can choose how we want to show up for our families. And the same thing goes for how we eat, for how we do anything really. If we eat on automatic pilot, we will eat and overeat and eat too fast, as is our habit. But if we eat with awareness, we get to choose how to eat, how much to eat, and we can be aware of when our bodies have actually had enough food rather than simply cleaning our plate. This choice of how to live our lives is ours, but we must be present to choose.
We have to be present to choose, right? So, why practice mindful eating when it comes to this? Because because over the past so many years, it says 25, but it's probably been longer, have been mindful practice have been shown to have a positive impact on psychological and physical health, including stress, depression, anxiety, chronic pain, and heart disease. And I can tell you from my own practice for the past dozen 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 or so years, mindful practices have truly helped my clients transform their lives, whether it was an addiction for smoking or alcohol or um, whatever the addiction was. Whether it was anxiety or stress, we know this practice can help us get there. So, when we can use something as useful as mindful eating uh, to connect clients to this practice, it can be another one of those doorways, those gateways that, okay, try this mindful eating practice. And what are you doing in mindful eating? You're being present. If you're doing a mindful eating practice where you're truly connected to the food, that's giving you the opportunity to practice mindfulness. And then you could say, what if you did that with other things in your life? What if you were mindful about everything you're watching on television? What if you're mindful about how you wake up in the morning and what your routine is and how you react to people around you? What if you had that ability? And this is helping us do that. So when we practice mindful eating, we see that there's evidence that mindful eating helps with the treatment of obesity as well as binge eating disorders because we're training the mind to do something different. The disorder is really connected to the mind, of course. And we know through neuroplasticity that we have the ability to change the structure of the mind, the habits. And there's a video later in this workshop that really talks about that habit change. The benefits of mindful eating aren't restricted to physical and emotional health improvements. They can also impact entire life through a better sense of balance and well being. Recognizing the way our body responds to what we're putting into it is so profound, and it has such an effect on our day, on our life, on every moment that we have. So being mindful helps with that. The other thing we recognize is how much time we spend eating. Pretty much we're rushing through a lot of these meals, right? Our lunches are cut shorter and shorter and shorter each day. We're eating on the run. Our dinner times are filled with distraction. This study shows that an hour and 12 minutes a day is what the average American spends eating, an hour and 12 minutes. But they spend 2.5 to 3 hours or more watching television. So we're spending more time consuming information than we are being connected to the food that we're putting into our body. School lunch periods provide an average of 7 to 11 minutes for a student to eat their lunch because they have all that time to get into wherever they're eating, to get whatever they are going to eat set up, and then to return to the classroom. It's all about getting done quickly. So, mindful eating isn't about doing things quickly, it's doing things with purpose and intention. Scientists are beginning to better understand the role of that mind body connection when it comes to eating behaviors, how the habits of the mind or the autopilot is not healthy, and how we can use this mind body connection to change. And when our mind is tuned out during mealtime, the digestive process may be up to 30 or 40% less effective. Study after study of that showing us that this can contribute to digestive distress, extra gas and bloating, and bowel irregularities because our mind isn't focused, it's got up in other things. So one of the things that a study that I watched, and I saw that I can't remember what it is because I see so many of these things. But if you eat a heavy meal, maybe you're on a date and you go to have a heavy meal and then you go watch some action adventure or some horror movie or some violent, something that has um, an emotional impact on you. When you're watching a show or a movie that has an emotional impact on you, our body goes into that stress response. It goes into that place where this, the depths of the mind can't tell the difference between what something is actually happening or if it's just a show or fantasy, right? Our body has the same reaction when we're in that stress mode. So the stress mode in and of itself fights against the digestive system, because when we go into that stress mode, all of the energy goes into the circulatory system and the respiratory system, and is all about the fight or flight response. So what gets shut down? The digestive system, because it's not needed right now. Well, the stress response is only supposed to last a couple of moments. But if we're in stress response for hours and hours, or now we're in those stress responses, chronic stress lasts for days and weeks and years, but that stress response that we have in that movie is going to affect the digestive system. It's true. So the mind body connection plays such a pivotal role in our ability to accurately assess hunger and fullness. When we focus on the fact that our body has the ability to signal us when we're full, if we're paying attention, but we don't train ourselves to pay attention to when our body tells us we're full. In fact, one of the worst things that habits that I see is that people go into what I call the steam shovel mode, where they're taking that fork of food, they're putting it in their mouth, they're chewing quickly, but while they're chewing, they go down and grab the next piece, and here comes that steam shovel, so I better swallow that food. That's the exact opposite of how we should be eating, because we're just shoveling food into our mouth, and that's not going to be helpful, because if you think about the digestive system, it starts in the mouth. We should be chewing our food completely and macerating it, injecting saliva into it, because our stomach gases are very powerful, but it only has so much power. So if we can break down that food before we swallow it, then it makes the digestive system be more functional. But when we're going in that steam shovel mode, we're just swallowing food so that we're clearing space for the next blob of food to get into our mouth. And we go into that steam shovel and we're swallowing big chunks of food into our stomach, and it doesn't get broken down properly. And it gets sent through our digestive system, and our digestive system isn't able to absorb all the beautiful nutrients that are in that food. And it leads to gas and bloating and digestive irregularities. A lot of the food gets passed out as waste when we're eating too much food. So what's the point? So then those cravings come back because our body's not getting what it needs, and it's just this vicious cycle. So if we could slow down and mindfully chew and pay attention to breaking down the food should be macerated to an extent before we swallow it, and pay attention. And when it gets into our stomach, it's able to be digested properly. It's so important that mind body connection really does play a pivotal role. And when we see that we eat meal after meal and snack after snack, barely aware of what we're eating and how much we're consuming, it's a terrible thing to do to our body. It's a terrible way to treat ourselves. So mindful eating is powerful because it keeps us in the present, and in the present, we can actually facilitate change. We can't change in the past. We can't go back and change it. We can plan to change in the future, but until we get there, we can't do anything about it. The only place we can change is in the present, and that's the truth. So if we want to change, we need to start right here, right now. And mindful eating leads us to greater awareness of how and why we eat the way we do. Be curious. And it can help us build a more positive relationship with food. So many people look at food as the enemy, but food is not the enemy. It's what we need. We need food, right? So when we get into this space of mindful eating, we need to recognize and be aware of the fact that we are a culture of multitasking. I can tell you in my previous career, I interviewed a lot of people for jobs, and I can tell you so many resumes had their, I'm a great multitasker. I'm a great multitasker. What does that even mean? What does that even mean? The truth is the mind can't focus on one more than one thing at a time, so that just means you're jumping from one task to the next. But how many of those tasks are being completed completely? So when we pair eating with other activities, like while we're driving or while we're working at our desks or while we're watching TV, then we are just focusing on what it is we choose to focus on. So our body is in autopilot when it comes to the eating part of it. We're not paying attention, so we're just swallowing food. So just think about this. Think about this. How many times do you get to the end of the day and you can't remember what you ate for lunch or where or how you ate your breakfast today? Were you mindful or did you just do it in a routine? We weren't present. So, to truly be present and mindful, there are some steps we can take. And look at how many times we're going to say, no, I can't do that. Turn off your devices. Take a moment and clear your mind and invite in a sense of gratitude. Awaken your senses. Notice the flavors. Notice the texture. And just start to slow down. Just slow down. One of the practices that so many people used to use, and some still do, is the practice of being grateful. Maybe it was done as saying grace or taking a few moments to say, bless this food or appreciation for the food. What a beautiful way to start. Before you start shoveling the food in your mouth, pause and be grateful for it. And again, reflect on where it came from. So, I want to talk about this basic mindful bite. And one of the best ways to experience this is through a meditation that I share with so many people. And this is a really great practice to bring for kids. We're going to do a raisin meditation. And so to do this, uh, we're going to focus on this meditation. So I hope if you've followed your instructions and you read the is you have a raisin or a couple of raisins or a box of raisins with you. So if you do, go ahead and sit back and go ahead and grab your raisin and follow along with this meditation. Hey there, this is Coach Bill with Meditate School of Mindfulness, and I'm coming to you again with another meditation that's going to really, this is a practice on connecting to the mindful way of eating. How this practice can be used to truly connect to um, our response to food. This type of meditation, the raisin meditation, it's one of those practices that are used in the practice of MBSR programs, mindfulness-based stress reduction, or so we use this meditation with the intention to bring an acute awareness to our senses and an awareness to our habits of eating. It goes back to our full theory of what we practice grows stronger. So what are we practicing while we're eating? A lot of the times we're practicing habits that we've had our entire life, how we're moving through food, how we treat food to help us soothe our emotions or make us feel a certain way. So this is a raisin meditation that's really going to focus on this practice. So if you choose, I'd like you to take a raisin or any other dried fruit that would be useful. And we use dried fruit because the flavor is so intense and, and surprising, where you could use a grape or something similar to that, but it's not, it's different. So if you don't like raisins, use a dried cranberry or some other dried fruit. Or if you can't, just imagine it. So let's begin. Let's begin by taking one raisin, and just hold it in the palm of your hand for a moment and focus on it. I wonder if you could look at it as if you have never seen anything like it before. Recognizing that a lot of times when we see something, we have our preconceived ideas of what it looks like. But what if you just looked at it and discovered it as something new? Look at the color of it and truly focus on the color. Look at the texture and notice how you can see the texture. And then if you will, take that raisin and put it between your index finger and your thumb and roll it around just a little bit and notice how it feels. And then put it back in the palm of your hand and ask yourself, can you feel the weight of it? Can you feel that spot where it's touching your skin? And notice, is it causing a shadow? Take the time to really see it. Again, imagining you've never seen one before. With great care and full attention. And let your eyes explore every part of it. Hands on it. Notice the folds and the ridges and the dark spots. Explore it. Then once again, take it back between your forefinger and your thumb. Maybe notice, squeeze it just a little bit. Is it spongy or is it hard? Does this raisin to you seem plump or dry? And now as you're holding it between your fingers, bring it up to your nose and hold it beneath your nose for a moment. And see what you notice with every inhale. Does it have a scent? Let it fill your awareness and maybe close your eyes. And if there is no scent, or very little, notice that. Assume that it has to smell a certain way. Notice what's there for you. And now if you're ready, take that raisin and slowly bring it to your mouth. And notice that you don't even have to pay attention to where your hand is going. Your hand and your arm know exactly where to put it. And notice how your tongue moves to receive it. And without chewing, with your mouth closed, simply explore the sensations of having it on your tongue. Just gradually explore that raisin with your tongue for a few moments. Notice how you can feel the texture of it, the weight of it. Is there any flavor there? How does it feel to just to just hold it for a moment. Notice the little bit of anticipation or the want or the need to start chewing it, but don't do it yet. Has it changed any as it's encountered the wetness of your mouth? And just breathe. And then when you're ready, consciously and slowly take a bite into the raisin, just one, and notice the effects of your mouth. Notice any tastes that are released. As your teeth bite into it, and then continue to chew slowly, but don't swallow just yet. Just chew and notice what's happening in your mouth. Notice the sensations. Notice the saliva. Notice the way it develops, how the flavor develops in your mouth. And as you continue to chew, I wonder if you could begin to notice or detect that first intention to swallow as it arises in your mind. And then go and swallow. Notice what the tongue does as you do swallow. And follow the sensations of swallowing the raisin. If you can, notice how it moves down your throat. And just consciously let yourself keep your mouth closed and notice a second or even a third swallow until it's all gone. And then notice what your tongue does after you've swallowed. And then just keep your mouth closed and spend a few moments registering the aftermath. Notice how that flavor remains. Is there an aftertaste? What does the absence of the raisin feel like? And notice if there's a tendency to start looking for another. But don't do that yet. Notice if you feel something in your stomach. Notice that the flavor's still there. And swallow a few more times. Naturally. Keeping your focus right there for a moment. Noticing the responses as you're focused on this meditation. And then just let yourself breathe. And notice by applying these skills to your eating habits, you can go from eating on autopilot to eating with intention. In our mind and our soul truly does connect to the intention of how we consume food. So try to eat with more awareness, using all of the senses for this pleasurable practice, because eating is pleasurable. And if we do it with intention and purpose, we can start to use our intuition and connect to our body and how it responds to how we eat. And we start to hone these wonderful skills of being present to the beauty. And this is mindful eating. I'm Coach Bill with Meditate School of Mindfulness, and thank you for joining me in this simple practice. So the simple practice of being mindful, a basic mindful bite, means we can use a fundamental technique like this, where we can approach mindful eating this way. And some of the basic ways we can do that is arriving at the food, seeing it, awakening ourselves to it. Notice what it is. Notice how it sometimes has a smell, a texture, a quality, a weight. Arriving at the food sometimes means that we take that focus and we spend a moment and think about where this food came from. So think about that raisin, right? And if you truly think about a raisin, you know that at some point that raisin was a grape. And if you go back further, at some point that raisin developed on a grape vine and turned into this beautiful piece of fruit. You go back a little further, and at some point somebody decided to create this grape vineyard and chose to raise it for grapes and raisins or whatever they did. So there's a whole process that we can arrive at the food and make a connection to the fact that this all started with somebody choosing to create this beautiful piece of food for us, to be a provider, to be of service to us all. And in doing so, cultivated these vines until they became mature enough to produce. So the steps on gathering this piece of raisin, this one raisin, or this box of raisin, or this bag of raisins, it starts there with the development and the connection to the fact that there is somebody involved in it. And all through the process, there are other people involved in it. There are people who gather these, who create these. And then at some point, they're packaged and put in a vehicle that ships them to wherever it is they go. And then they show up in our stores. And from then, they're lovingly placed on the shelf. And all of these steps happened for us to have that little raisin in front of us. It just didn't pop up. It's not magic. So we arrive at it, we awaken to it, we should feel grateful for it, and that's how we really do awaken to the food. And then we should tune into the body and pay attention to all these amazing sensations that we have, the senses. And with the eating, we can connect to almost each and every one of them. Some of foods don't make a sound, but do they, right? So there's a crunchiness, and that is the sound that your ears pick up. There's a feeling attached to it. So you have the feeling, you have the vision, you have the smell and the taste and the hearing. So when we connect to it and we tune into the body, we can connect to all of the senses that are connected with this practice of eating. And then we can recognize the service of the food is to nourish our body, to be fuel, to give us what we need, the nutrients, the stuff that fills us and allows us to move forward. That all can happen in one little mindful bite. And if we take the time to do that more, then we start to arrive at the food, we awaken to the food, we tune into how it is received in the body, and we notice that the food is there to be of service. Service. We should eat in order to live, not live to eat. It's a simple practice. The arriving at the food means that we become aware of the food before a meal or a snack, that it has come into our personal space and how it has gotten there. It sounds simple, but it's actually so much more than that. To recognize that in our society, in this day and age, food is so abundant that we scarcely are aware of it. We just assume it's going to be there. We even forget that we made that choice to eat sometimes. So, as I just said, you go through these different steps of awakening yourself to the food, awakening to it. Maybe just during 30 seconds, you take a close look at the food and you notice the colors and the shapes and the arrangement of it. You name to yourself all of the foods that you see on your plate. Name to yourself all the plants and or animals that are represented in the food. Detect the odors. Think about all the human effort that went in to get the food to you. And imagine yourself eating each piece of food attentively and on purpose. It's such a great step. And when we think about it, every place we go to eat, at some point, somebody created this amazing recipe that we're enjoying. It might be our favorite food. So you think about our favorite food that we order in our favorite restaurant. And if we arrive at it, we recognize that a chef at some point created this recipe of putting all these amazing ingredients together to create this recipe. And then it was something that was able to be replicated over and over and over again. So if you go into a restaurant they have more than one cook, so each and every one of those cooks or chefs had to learn how to make this dish and perfect it and put all those ingredients together to create it for you lovingly. All of these things come from that place where somebody feels a passion for creating this recipe because they feel a passion for cooking, right? They feel a passion for cooking. Why? Because they want to help others feel good, to be healthy. That's arriving at the food and recognizing there are a lot of things that happen before that food shows up on your plate. If we do this activity seriously, and we're going to do this again in just a moment, we'll truly have arrived at the meal. And that sets the stage to continue our mindful practice while we're eating. Awakening ourselves to it means that we pay attention to all the aspects of the food. And when we awaken, we notice the sensations of the food, such as taste and the change of flavors and the texture and the aroma. And we can look deep and see the effort and the resources and the sacrifices within each and every piece of food that we eat. A mindful eater should spend at least a moment during each bite waking up to some aspect of that food. And then we tune into the body. And when we're eating mindfully, we pay a close attention to ourselves as we eat, becoming aware of how many chews we're taking, for how many times it takes us to chew that food completely, paying attention to how quickly we're taking that food from the plate to our mouth and taking our time, and having a baseline for what we believe is the right number of bites. Noticing the emotions that are there, not resisting them, not turning away from them, but notice that we sometimes have an emotional connection to what we're eating. And then notice how our body feels as we eat. With mindful eating, we don't look at food as good or bad. We don't focus on the guilt associated with eating. We just arrive at the food, we awaken ourselves to it, and we tune into how it's being received in our body. And mindful eating includes being aware of all the activities that surround food and eating, from the setting and the clearing of the tables to the loading of the dishwasher to putting away leftovers to all those steps. Or if you're in a restaurant, all the steps of being sent to your table, the ambiance that was created, the beautiful menu that you're looking at, the server who's there to serve you, the chef that's there to cook for you, all the steps of what happens. And then the opposite, when they pull the plates away, and how they could package your food for you, how somebody is going to wash that dish, and how it gets repeated over and over and over again. And when we adapt careful and deliberate ways of behaving with any action involving food, we help ourselves stay in the moment, and we heighten our degree at which we honor the food, honoring the food with gratitude, with kindness, with love, understanding that there is more to this food than just something in front of me. So, we're going to do another exercise in mindful eating. In this one, we call the tangerine meditation. It's very similar. And if you read the instructions, it says to have a tangerine or a piece of fruit. If you don't have either, then just when we begin, close your eyes and picture it. Your mind will take you there if you allow it to. Hey there, this is Coach Bill with Meditate School of Mindfulness, and I'm coming to you with this meditation that is about awareness. And this is called a tangerine meditation, and it's suggested, if you have one, to use a tangerine for this session. Or you could use another piece of fruit, an orange, an apple, or even a grape. But it's best to use something that you can peel. Or if you don't have any of those things, we can connect to that amazing imagination and close your eyes instead of looking at the piece of fruit, and just imagine it. So this is your session, so however you choose to do it is up to you. I'm simply the guide. But if you're ready, just allow yourself to go ahead and turn your attention to your breath for a moment. And just start to slow down and just feel your breath flowing in and out. And let yourself be present. For just a few moments, allow yourself to let go of all the things on your to-do list, of the busyness, and just let yourself be present for a moment. And give yourself this opportunity to discover presence. So as you rest and breathe now, if you have that piece of fruit, let it sit in front of you, on a table, or imagine it sitting in front of you on the table. And just look at it for a moment. Just look at it and be present with it. Just picture the color, see the color, notice the shape, notice the little dimple or the stem connected to it. And as you picture it, really look at it. Is it exactly round? Or is it misshapen a little bit? Just imagine that perfect package, the skin, the structure. And then if you have one, pick it up in your hand and rest it in the palm of your hand. And just hold it for a moment. Notice the weight of it. Let your fingers run across the surface and notice, is the surface smooth or rough? Rough. How does it feel on the skin? Connect to its weight and feel it. Notice the depths of the color and just picture that skin and how perfect. For you is that perfect little package. It's sealed completely. The skin of that fruit protects the inside. Think of how perfect it is. As you imagine it, or you feel it, raise it up to your nose and smell it now. Breathe in nice and deep. Even close your eyes and take in a nice deep breath. And as you smell it, notice where you feel how your body responds to that scent. Then lower it back down and look at it again, or imagine it. Imagine that perfect little fruit. Imagine, if you will, that that fruit developed from a flower. Picture that flower now. Imagine how that flower opened up. Picture it for a moment in your mind's eye. Imagine that little flower and how at times maybe bees came in and collected its nectar to share with other flowers. Imagine after time that little flower became this little green round fruit. And then it grew and turned into this beautiful thing before you. Just picture that. Imagine for a moment the tree from which it came. That tree with its green leaves. Imagine it covered that fruit. As you imagine that tree, recognize that at some point somebody decided to plant this beautiful tree, this grove of trees. It didn't just appear. It happened for a reason. Just imagine that grove of trees where the tangerine grew, and see all the other trees, and recognize that this is where this fruit came from. It just didn't appear. And then, if you will, open your eyes again if you're holding that fruit. Or if you're imagining it, keep your eyes closed and imagine, or begin to peel that tangerine just a little bit. Just pierce the skin and pull it back just a little bit. And then bring it back up to your nose and breathe in nice and deep and close your eyes a moment. And breathe in that scent and notice how it's different. And think about where you feel that in your body. How your body responds to that scent. And then begin to peel that skin and feel it. Notice the inside peel. Notice the texture of it. And then just take your time. And if you listen, you can hear the peeling. Notice the scent. Notice the way it feels in your hand. Recognize that from the skin of that fruit comes the essential oils that we use. That perfect little package. And then notice inside that fruit. the color and the shape of the sections inside, the white strings of tangerine. And then once you've completely peeled that fruit, again, notice its weight as you hold it in your hand. Notice how it's changed. Run your fingers over the surface and notice you can feel a little softness now. And bring it up to your nose and smell real deep. And notice how now that the skin is not there, the scent is different. And then, if you will, remove one of those little segments, just one, and put the rest aside. And then just hold that little segment between your fingers. Again, another perfect little package that the membrane around that section is perfect. Whole section is perfect. Holding in all that juiciness and feel its texture again. And then if you're ready, just imagine or place that section on your tongue and hold it in your mouth for a moment, taste of it. And then when you're ready, bite into that tangerine segment and let that flavor flow through your mouth. Don't rush, just take your time and let that flavor develop on your tongue. If you'd like to, if you haven't already, start to chew that segment very slow. Is it juicy? Notice how it is. Just chew it nice and slow and notice how the flavor changes and fills your mouth. And when you're ready, if you haven't already, go ahead and swallow. But once you swallow, keep your focus on the taste and notice how the flavor lingers. And ask yourself for a moment, what do you like about that taste? What do you like about that fruit? And then ask yourself, do you want more? Do you want more? And then look back down at that fruit before you and notice how many pieces are left. How many segments are there? And then take one at a time, at your own pace, and do the same thing again. And each and every segment that you put in your mouth and chew on, really take of how it tastes, how it smells, how it feels to eat that beautiful, beautiful piece of fruit. And just continue to eat them that way. But each and every time you take one, ask yourself, do you need more? And notice that signal of satisfaction when you've had enough. And before you pick up the next piece, ask yourself, do you need more? Or was that last piece enough to satisfy the hunger or the craving for sweetness or juiciness? And once you've listened to the answer, if you have any left, just put them aside. Maybe put them in a container and save them for another time. But reflect for a moment on how this experience was for you. Taking notice of how it smelled and tasted and felt. And recognize what you've just done is meditated on eating. This is mindful eating. This is being present with the food that you eat. Now imagine doing that with other foods, with some of the foods that we crave. Imagine going to the next thing, a potato chip, or a dessert, or something that we crave from time to time. And yes, the food would be different, of different structure, of different flavor, of different needs. But each and every time we eat something, we can go through those steps of thinking about where it came from, how it was produced, whether it grew naturally or was it created. Was it created from a loving recipe that created this beautiful conglomeration that formed what it is you're liking? And then slowly focus on the flavor, focus on how it feels to eat it. Pay attention to the body's response to whatever food you're eating, and then at the end of the bite, reflect on it. Notice if the flavor lingers on your tongue or if it just disappears. Spend some time reflecting and let yourself notice the depth of the flavor. And notice that so many foods are just one-dimensional. That as we go through our life in this society, we tend to crave sweet or salty, forgetting about all those beautiful flavors in between. And through this practice, every single time you take a bite, ask yourself, was that enough? Do you truly need more? And if you're eating with purpose and intention, you'll be okay with stopping before you finish, finishing what's in front of us and how that's not always necessary. And through this practice of mindful eating, we have the ability to stop and listen. Listen to our body's signals. Listen to the body's response. And this is mindful eating. And this is mindful eating. I'm Coach Bill, and I thank you for joining me on this session. If you care to learn more or study the practice of mindful eating, visit our website at www.meditateyou.me and look under our workshops, or maybe you're already attending one, as this is part of it. But it's been my honor to share this practice with you. So there you go, a simple practice, which is more than simple. There's so much more involved in it than what we give credit for to how we're approaching food. So you think of something as beautiful and rich and something so hearty and something so healthy and useful as a tangerine. And you have to ask yourself, when you go into a store, convenience store, you know that there is fresh fruit in most of those places. So why not grab a tangerine instead of a bag of potato chips? Especially if you were truly present in that meditation. When you breathe in the scent of a fruit like that, you can feel your body's response to it. When you place it in your mouth and you start to eat it, you can feel there's a real response to it. So we have to really bring ourselves into awareness. And one of the focuses we need to recognize is when we're eating, are we eating out of habit or emotion or hunger or boredom? So how do we tell if we're hungry? If we're hungry, there are physical signs. And if we're truly hungry, the desire to eat doesn't go away. Because if you want to test that and you turn your mind to something else and you start, I don't know, watching a show or doing something else. And if the hunger's truly hunger, it remains. And the desire for food intensifies over time. And even if it's something that we don't really think is our favorite food, we'll eat it because we're hungry. And it sounds like something we should have. So we shouldn't ignore true hunger. But we really see that most people need to eat every 3 to 4 hours while awake because it brings balance to the blood sugar, it balances the mood, and it sets the metabolic rate, right? Metabolic rate, right? And we see, how often do we know when it's time to eat? Or how do we know when it's time to eat? So if you're doing it by the clock, is that even legitimate? Or just that, 8 o'clock a.m., noon, 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock p.m., you're just doing it out of habit. We're not doing it because we're hungry. Then we have to recognize the difference between hunger and a craving. What is a craving? A craving means there's no real physical hunger, pain. And if it is just a craving, the thought of eating goes away if we distract ourselves with something else. A craving gets us connected to there's an emotional reason about why we're eating that food, that we want something specific, crunchy or salty or sweet. And those are legitimate things, and we should recognize them. But we should also recognize that when we have a craving, we have a choice whether we're going to entertain it or not, because a craving is just a thought. We've convinced ourselves that we need something. It's a thought. And when we practice paying attention to our thoughts, we can choose which pet thoughts to focus on or not. So if it's a craving for something crunchy and we want to, and we do go through the steps of eating something crunchy. So say you go grab a bag of potato chips, right? You grab that bag of potato chips because you want something crunchy and you start eating it. So the craving itself will go away pretty quickly as soon as you start crunching. And if you slow down and do it mindfully and you think about it from this perspective, think about a bag of potato chips and think about how we usually eat them. And so here's a bag of potato chips. And this is a nice little bag, right? So you grab a bag of potato chips, and in this package, I don't know how many's in there, but there's several. So this is a regular old bag of classic Lay's potato chips. And the truth is, I don't know how long it's been around, but it's here because I decided to bring it to this class. And I have this craving for something crunchy and salty. So that's all in this little package, right? So if I arrive at this food and I think about it and I think about where this food came from, of course, a potato chip would come from a potato, I would hope. So you read the instruction, you see what's in it, and there's potatoes, vegetable oil, which is made out of sunflower, corn, and canola oil, and salt. And that's all there is to it. Three simple ingredients. Three simple ingredients. And I assume they're all pretty natural, right? Well, not always healthy, but so then you arrive at this food and you open the bag and you smell it. And that scent of potato chips, it's recognizable. But if we truly think about what we like about that smell, it's not that pleasant. You actually smell the saltiness, which is okay. You can smell a bit of the potato chip, but mostly when you're doing something, unless it's a baked one, you're smelling oil. That's all I smell. That's really all I smell. So if we arrive at this potato chip because I'm craving something like this, and we take one, just one. Now, how often do you eat one potato chip out of the bag at a time? If you even eat potato chips. I'm not saying you do. This is just an example. Use it for something else if you'd like. But so you take one potato chip out of the bag, one, and you do what we just did with that tangerine. And you think about how we felt when we went through the process of that tangerine. You hold it in your hand, you feel it's kind of weightless, there's not much to it. You rub it between your fingers, and it's kind of gritty, and already my fingers are covered in a bit of oil. That's not pleasant, right? You smell it. I mean, smell it deeply, inhale deeply, and you ask yourself, what do you like about that smell? And it's actually kind of, I don't know. To me, it seems a little rancid, right? Why would I put that in my mouth? But deep down inside, I like the taste of potato chips because somewhere along the way, I thought I liked them. So, okay, I want to satisfy that craving for crunchiness and saltiness. So I put this one potato chip in my mouth, and I'm going to do it here because, I don't know, it's what we do. Hold it. I can't talk and do that at the same time, but you put it in your mouth and you ask yourself what you like about it, and you taste that saltiness, and then you start to chew it. And there's a real connection to that crunchiness that you get in your ear. That crunchiness is really is it's there, it's satisfying. It feels good. But you do that for a few minutes. I can't talk and do this, so um and then you just let it sit in your mouth like you did with with that tangerine. And you ask yourself, what's left after you swallow that potato chip? After you've chewed it really well and paid attention to how it goes down. And you notice all that really is left in your mouth is a bit of oiliness and some saltiness. And after a couple more swallows, that goes away. The taste of a potato chip is very one dimensional. And you don't really feel a response in your physical body as you do when you eat something like a tangerine. But let's just say you really do like potato chips, and okay, I'm going to have another one. So you grab another potato chip, just one, and you go through that whole routine again. And when you get to the end, right when you're about to swallow, you ask yourself, what do I like about this? What do I like about this? So as you're eating a potato chip, okay, I like the saltiness. I like the crunchiness. That's about it, right? And so you keep chewing, you swallow that potato chip and you say, do I need another one? Oh, yeah, I still have a craving. I'd still like another one. So you take one more. Do the same thing. Smell it, put it on your tongue, let it sit there for a moment, start to chew it real slow, taste it. What do you taste? Saltiness, crunchiness, you swallow. What did I like about it? What remains? And do I need another one? And when I do this exercise with a group of people, I don't care who they are, usually by the time you get to that fourth or fifth, or sometimes people are a little more, you say, I'm okay. I don't need any more. Because you've satisfied the craving for crunchiness, right? You've got that. If you're taking your time, you satisfy that craving. And if you're chewing that potato chip one at a time, nice and slow, you've already spent 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 minutes chewing. So you've satisfied that craving for crunchiness. You've obviously satisfied the craving for saltiness, if that's what it was, or whatever other flavor is there. So what's left? There's nothing left, because as you keep eating it, the intensity of the flavor goes away. Now you're just eating it because it's here, unless you're truly hungry. But most of the time, we're not eating potato chips because we're hungry. It's because there's a craving. So what do I do with this? And here's where a lot of people get a little wonky, because they don't want to waste it. They don't want to waste it. Well, I have to finish it, because wasting food is bad. Wasting food is bad. But let me put this to you. When it comes to wasting food, doesn't it make more sense to waste it outside of yourself than to waste it putting it in your body? It's waste either way. But doesn't it have a more profound effect on your body if you overeat? And the way my body's reacting to that potato chip right now is not positive. It's just, it's not good. So why waste it by putting it in? Now, if we have the opportunity to fold it up and save it for another time when we have the craving again, great. But sometimes we don't have that opportunity. So I put it to you again. What's the difference between throwing it away or throwing it down your throat? Hmm. I know everybody has an answer for that. And every time I hold a class, somebody has an answer for that. But either you can save it for another time, you can discard it, or you can shovel it down into your throat and let your body respond to whatever it is you're overeating. One of those three is the worst, and I can tell you which one it is, but I think it's pretty logical. So we get into that space where we can connect to the cravings that we have and recognize it's normal to feel cravings, but we want to relate to them mindfully and not get blinded by them, and recognize that we can change that craving, we can change that habit. We can learn to become aware of our cravings and their messages. What is that craving telling me? Is it just because I'm bored? Is it because I'm feeling lonely or sad or worried, anxious, stressed? Hmm. Then we go back to getting into this space of portions, mindful portions. So going back to that portion of a segment of a tangerine, the portion of one potato chip at a time, one raisin at a time, mindfully paying attention. So, mindful portions doesn't mean just the size of the bite or how much food is on the plate, but it's how often we eat, how much food is on the spoon or fork, how long we take to chew our food, and how often we stop during the meal to find out if we really need to eat more, and how much time we pause between bites. If we practice the pause, if we practice the pause before we pick up that fork again, it gives our body the opportunity to signal when we've had enough. It gives ourselves that time to ask a question: do I really need more? And here's the beauty of it: when you start eating that way, you can enjoy the foods that you love. So, say for instance, you enjoy cheesecake or chocolate cake or whatever it is. You can have that, but only take a few bites of it, because generally we enjoy something because we enjoy the flavor of it. So if you take a couple or 3 or 4 bites, small mindful bites of a piece of cake or cheesecake, and put it on our tongue, enjoy it and savor it, and just take your time and let those flavors develop. Let you feel that energy or whatever that connection is that you have to that food. Let yourself truly connect to it, Instead of just mindfully shoveling it in your mouth, you can savor it, you can respect it, you can enjoy it one bite at a time, and then the next bite. And ask yourself what you really like about it. Ask yourself how it's making you feel. Recognize where that feeling's coming from. And then perhaps, do I need another? And then you go to that third bite. I don't really need another, but okay, I'll take the fourth bite. And now you definitely don't need another. So here's this piece of cake sitting in front of you. Can you walk away? Can you let it go? Can you put it aside for another time? Can you share it with a friend? Or if you don't have any other options, can you just throw it away? Throwing it away. Waste. Is it waste? Is it waste to put it in your body, or is it waste to throw it away? Which one's better? That's the challenge. And recognize the emotions that come up with that. So, how do we incorporate this into our everyday life? Look, we can't always do it. When we're sitting having an enjoyable meal with somebody, we don't want to say, hey, wait, I'm mindfully eating. But if you can do it more often than not, while you're having breakfast, having lunch, while you're having dinner at certain times, if you can incorporate it and share it with the other people that you live with, your family, with some of your friends, it could change the way we approach food. You can go from bad habits to good. Breaking an eating habit and forming a new one is difficult, but it can be done. And in time, mindful eating isn't going to make you lose a ton of weight if that's what your goal is quickly. But what it is going to do is it's going to transform you so that you eat more mindfully, so that over time your body becomes more healthy. And in doing so, you do reduce your weight. But that's not the overall goal. It's to change the habits and to be mindful. So, some of the suggestions we can have is try to eat sitting down. Standing up is never great when eating. Create a bit of an ambiance. Try to eat without the newspaper or the TV or a computer or work. Try to chew your food mindfully. Now, I'm not sure if 50 bites is right, but uh, just being focused on that. And here's an interesting practice to try to make your meal last at least 20 minutes. Take your time, space it out. Try not to rush if you can. Some other suggestions to try is try to eat with your other hand. That'll slow you down. Don't eat from a bag or a box because when you eat from a bag, you can't see what's inside, so you just keep eating it. Try to get in the habit of boxing up some of your food in the restaurant and keep extra food away from the table. So there's a big difference between eating family style and eating from putting the having to get up to get the food. If there is a bag, a pile of something that you like sitting in front of you, and it just keeps grabbing your attention, and you'll eat more of it. That's a fact. If we get into the habit of boxing up half the food at the restaurant, we'll have that expectation that I have some extra left out. One of the restaurants I finished my career in as a manager, I was working in a cheesecake factory. And if you've ever been to one of those places, you know that they serve these huge amounts of food, massive amounts of food. And if you look at the calorie count on most of those entrees that they serve, they're enormous, right? So in one of our training sessions, I was able to meet one of the head chefs, and I asked him, why do we create such huge? And they said that the owner, when he first started creating these meals and developing them, the goal was for that people would come and eat some and take the rest home, and they'd have a meal for another time. But I could tell you, all those years I worked in that restaurant and many others, most people eat everything on their plate, all those calories, in addition to the drinks that they're having and the dessert that they have. So it becomes it is can be a practice that we can choose to focus on. Another great tool to use is to use smaller plates at a meal because, as you saw in one of those videos we watched, we kind of put an arbitrary amount of food on our plate. We want to fill up the plate, and then if it's in front of us, we'll tend to eat more of it. Trying not to skip meals is important because if we skip a meal and we fall into that place of hunger, a lot of times we overindulge. And if we plan meals and snacks ahead of time, we're going to make better choices. Another great tool is to keep a mindful journal. Write down what you're eating. So all these things get into this space where we're getting into the practice of changing habits. With mindfulness, we bring awareness to our habits and we find that we have the power to rewire the brain. to focus on the fact that what we practice grows stronger. What we practice grows stronger.
Some of the research that I think is most interesting and actually most optimistic is the research on meditation and the brain. So I want to give you just very brief background. This has nothing to do with meditation. But basically, positive and negative emotions look different in the brain. So when we're feeling happy, joyful, vital, alert, we have higher left to right ratios in our prefrontal cortex. When we're feeling depressed, anxious, in fact, even people who have post-traumatic stress disorder or severe depression, we see much greater activity in the right to left ratio in the prefrontal cortex, which is this part of the brain that developed more recently. So when they did a study on meditators, they brought in this Tibetan Lama, and what they found is that his left to right ratio was much higher than any of the other 175 subjects they brought into the laboratory. And so they asked, is this just a random artifact, right? Was he kind of born happy, and so then he decided to be a monk and a meditator and meditate? Or did the tens of thousands of hours that he had dedicated to this practice actually have an impact? So they did the gold standard, which is a randomized controlled trial. They took 41 biotechnology employees who had never meditated. Right, if they can do it, anyone can. They randomly assigned them into a mindfulness group taught by John Kabat-Zinn, or a waitlist group, and then they looked, is there change in the activity of the brain? And what they found is that 4 months later, there was significant differences in this left to right ratio, where they had much greater activity in the left to right with greater positive emotions, vitality. This is extraordinarily hopeful, and I want to explain why for those of you who aren't psychologists. In psychology, there's something called a happiness set point. And it's been repeated over and over again in the research that we find that people basically, just like you have a weight set point, you basically have this kind of continuum of happiness that you're born with, and you can't really move it too far. So what they found is that when you win the lottery, you have this initial blip of, yes, life's going to be great forever, and then a year later, you're back to your baseline level of happiness. If you're in a terrible accident and you become a paraplegic, you have this huge dip, and then within 1 year, you're back almost to your baseline. When I first read this, I thought it was shocking. So surprising, and yet they replicate it again and again. So this is great news if you're born happy, right? It's like, it doesn't matter, you get divorced, you lose your job, whatever, and you just pop back up. It's like you're a Bobo doll. This isn't such good news for most of the people that I work with who are coming to see me, where they weren't necessarily born happy. And so even if you work really hard and you make a lot of money and you get the house in Hawaii, or you win the lottery, or you marry the perfect person, or you have, it doesn't actually change your happiness level. What is so hopeful about this new research is what it says is that even though changing your exterior circumstances, winning the lottery, doesn't change your happiness level, changing your interior landscape can. Changing our interior environment through training the mind and heart and body in these practices can actually shift our levels of happiness. Richie Davidson, who is the principal investigator of the study, he says, happiness can be trained because the very structure of our brain can be modified. So what he's talking about here is neuroplasticity. Our repeated experiences shape our brain. Does this remind you of anything? Right? It's exactly what this monk told me. What we practice becomes stronger. Everything that we practice, every single moment matters. So these are brains from Harvard. I think that makes them a little more special. And basically, Sarah Lazar did this wonderful early research, and what she found is that meditators, the actual parts of their brain that have to do with attention, concentration, emotional intelligence, compassion, those parts of the brain actually get stronger, bigger. It's called cortical thickening. And that this thickening is correlated with practice. what we practice gets stronger. So the way I like to think of it is we have these super highways of habits. And they're just like, they're well-grooved pathways in our brain, right? They just, they're what we automatically do. And what mindfulness is helping us start to do is to kind of like build, kind of like, I think of it as like digging a country road. You're clearing all the brambles in your brain. You're creating this new neural pathway that's like, oh, I'm going to actually do it with compassion this time, or with a little more patience, or a little more presence. And so instead of going down that same superhighway of habit, we're shifting and we're going down a different pathway. And every single time that we do this, we're strengthening that pathway so that eventually that pathway becomes the habit.
So, what are we going to take from this? We're going to take from this the fact that we do have the ability to change our habits. We do have the ability to change the way we respond to so many things in our life. And we can do it by bringing all these different tools into our practice. And one of the best ones to use for ourselves, for our clients, for our people around us is mindful eating. In recognizing that mindful eating involves paying attention to the experience of eating and drinking, not just outside, but inside of ourselves. Mindful eating helps us learn to hear what our body is telling us about the hunger and the cravings, about the satisfactions and the emotions. It involves all of the senses. And eating mindfully can overall improve our health, not just our weight, but our emotional health, our mental health, our heart health. It can truly change us. And so, where do we start? How do we begin? Just one meal at a time. Just try it. Just try it. And as you begin to practice this, it'll suddenly become normal. You don't even have to think about it anymore. It's how you move forward. So if you have any questions, just send me an email at meditateyou@gmail.com, or talk to your if you're working with a mentor right now. But practice. Practice. What you practice grows stronger. It's so important to get back to that truth. And that's it for me. So I appreciate you sharing this time with me, and I hope you got something out of it. I'm Coach Bill. We'll see.